Exceptional Radio is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Castle in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. And we're back. It's the 15th of December. And we're approaching winter, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it. The last few days I go outside, and even though the sun's not really out, it just hasn't quite set in.
Yeah. Still, hopefully it'll stay mild like this. Usually it doesn't really get cold till January anyway.
Yeah.
But sometimes it'll snow as early as October, so that's kind of where, we're lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, some people really like the snow or whatever, but fuck that.
I'm torn because there's part of me that really enjoys wearing cold weather clothing.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the part of me that doesn't want to go inside once I'm wearing it, because then it's like, oh man, everyone keeps their heat up high enough that you can wear t-shirts.
Right.
Or, and then you got to strip down.
Well, I'm starting to wonder what different people keep their temperatures at, because some people keep it in the 60s.
Yeah.
And some people keep it in the 70s, and that's where, I just wonder what is the
optimal range of temperatures?
Not the optimal. I mean, obviously it's it's like a personal choice or whatever, but I just wonder what informs those people to choose their temperatures, because that's where I'm like, is it like I don't even understand the point of having heating if you're going to keep it at 65. To me that seems like
that's air conditioning temperature.
Right, exactly. I mean, we don't even turn our air conditioner that low.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm like,
that's like car air conditioning when you're in the sun baking in a small enclosed space temperature. We generally try to keep it in the 70 range, somewhere in the 72 range, 74.
Yeah.
If it's bitter cold out, I'll turn it up to the point where it's actually comfortable inside, because
that's the whole point.
I don't like to be shaking in my house.
I mean, why don't you go live in a cave
if you want to be cold?
Right, yeah. That's kind of where, again, it seems like I don't understand the point of having heating and air if you're not going to use it.
Yeah.
It just seems like, I don't know, weird.
It's a strange social convention. There's extremes. There's I want to be able to wear a hoodie in the middle of summer, cold.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's I want to be naked in the bitter cold of winter in the middle of, in my house.
Mm-hmm.
And you find that all the time. I find this range all the time when I go to people's houses. And it's not necessarily an economic decision either.
Right.
Because I've been to, fancy houses that are frigid, that are basically refrigerators. Your ice doesn't melt.
Yeah.
and I've been to, apartments where it's the thing about apartments it's always been amusing to me is that if the apartment's sandwiched between two other apartments and their heats are up really high, that middle apartment doesn't have to run their heat as often.
Right.
And so I guess there are a lot of factors that determine how hot a dwelling can be.
Mm-hmm.
I live on the top of a hill, and so the wind gets pretty intense sometimes, and I feel like that's leaching off a lot of heat.
But I wonder if it's warmer at the top of the hill than it is at the bottom anyway.
Yeah.
It might be a couple degrees cooler down there. I mean, even just
I have more sunlight.
Yeah.
It's just
and heat rises. So.
And I have a potentially longer exposure to sunlight at the top of the hill.
Oh yeah, I've been in hilly places where at the bottom of the hill it may be 10 degrees cooler.
Oh yeah. And an additional 10 degrees in the shade.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think that's, it's one of these things that we may never actually have to deal with, but the snowball Earth. There was one giant extinction that occurred, and there was or around the time of a snowball Earth, and I was reading that the biodiversity dropped something like 90%,
Mm-hmm.
and the only place that life was able to really flourish was at the boundary between the ice and water, where little pockets of oxygen were being trapped as a part of geologic process,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where almost all of our current batch of life really came from. It was these little pools right on the boundary of freezing and not freezing,
Mm-hmm.
and that's crazy. But we haven't had to experience anything like that. Like, humanity has existed for the last 200,000 plus years in essentially the same climate, and we've only experienced 3-degree average change or
Well,
something like that.
I mean, I don't know if that's accurate in that I want to say
Well, there was a mini ice age.
right, but I want to say that is also part of the potential notion that there's like a civilization that's risen and been gone that now is like lore in that in those last 200,000 years there was likely some massive event, and especially what was it, the volcano eruption that was the Minoan civilization. It completely wiped them out. So there's like been it was
Was
like
that Vesuvius? Or I'm trying to think.
no, I don't think it was
I'm
Vesuvius.
trying to remember my Mediterranean history.
Um, but regardless,
Yeah.
they, it would have been something that also affected the rest of the planet.
Yeah.
So there's been planetary level events that have wiped out full civilizations.
Oh, sure.
But it's not like extinction level of
Yeah.
the same scale. So that's where it's like it's not that there hasn't been any, and even the Tunguska event. Like I think that was like it was just a matter of luck that it wasn't an extinction level.
Yeah. Well, there have been other events like the series, the chain of events that led up to the eventual decline of the age of dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
We know now that the big impact is very real because there's iridium spattered all over the globe, and that stuff comes from space. But we also know through core samples that there was like 700,000 years of volcanic activity on a level that is we have reached that level of carbon output with all of our cars in the last few years.
Right.
But this went on for 700,000 years.
Yeah.
700,000 years of peak late stage capitalism, automotive exhaust for 700,000 years wiped out dinosaurs and killed plant life. It wasn't just the big impact. That was the
part of it.
That was the final straw.
Yeah.
But it had been building up to that for close to 1 million years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an unfathomably long period of time for humans.
Yeah.
I mean, 100 years is long for a human.
Well, I think it's just I don't know if we have the capacity to keep a continuous history for a tenth of that.
Yeah.
Let alone the entire time, because we've proven over and over that we can't do that.
The Chinese can keep track. Their records only go back 10,000 years.
Is it even 10? Is that I thought it was like
they have records of. I mean, they have.
Well, they're continuous. I think only to like 6.
Oh,
so
yeah, not even
some
that,
of them go back to 10, but they're not continuous.
Yeah, there are
all
huge
the way.
gaps, and really what that demonstrates is it's the fragility of the medium that they're storing their information in, because those scrolls did not last very long, and the few that have survived are basically like texts how to learn Chinese, and some of the oldest like Korean poetry is all like how to learn written Chinese and how to read Chinese, basically. So it's there. It's hard to maintain data for that long. We don't have anything that can store data that long.
No.
We want to pretend a CD can last 10,000 years, but only if it's never exposed to oxygen.
Or how long can the CD player last?
Yeah. How long?
Like, how long will the glue on the lens
Yeah.
last?
Before it oxidizes and deteriorates into
Yeah.
something else, or the plastics sublimate all their weird gases that keep them as plastics. That's one of those things that I always thought was interesting. This idea that like we're gonna save humanity from itself or something. But if we're on like the verge of an ice age or some kind of cataclysmic event that's gonna force humanity to change everything, how are we gonna save our actual humanity, our history? What do we save, and how do we even access it later? Like, I mean, we can store all the data, all the knowledge of humanity on hard drives, but if we don't have electricity, we can't access it.
This is where crystals come in.
Yeah.
Which is also why the mention of crystals in ancient text is like storage media is like kind of, it seems like where we're headed.
Yeah.
Like um, solid state drives that use, uh, diamond or quartz. What other? There's like a couple different crystals and crystalline structures that are prime for information storage that also can last for a very long time. So I could think that's kind of where it's.
And
it's
our science
going.
has finally gotten to the point that we can extrude artificial diamond structures that are harder than natural diamonds, which is pretty fantastic. It always amuses me about the whole like diamond thing, because we've had 60 plus years of diamonds are a girl's best friend, and this is all she wants, and this whole marketing campaign to make men buy diamonds like they're scarce, and then it turns out that diamonds are not scarce, and pretty much any time that there's
I mean, they never were.
Like, it's like pretty much any time there's any tectonic activity, a vein of diamonds appears.
But the issue was they knew the entire time that they were not scarce. So then marketing is why the De Beers scandal became a thing.
Yeah.
Which is like, I think that's another. I think it's like a generational memory that got lost.
Yeah.
Which allowed the idea of diamond rings to persist. People like tried.
They did it to America, and they did to Japan, and then to China, and every time they had the same kind of success rates.
Yeah.
They had this marked, steady climb of and the weird part, of course, is that it's men buying diamonds. It's not women buying diamonds. All the numbers point to women are like, I can take it or leave it. But men are like, I got to get this as a status symbol. I've got to put this on my trophy.
I bet the pawning is the women.
Yeah. They're like, it's not a big deal. Yes, got the diamond. I think that's part of the magic of capitalism, if we can really call it sorcery of capitalism. It's that it convinces people that they want things that they don't need, and they need things that they didn't even know they wanted or didn't even know existed.
I mean, I think there's an element of people needing to amuse themselves to pass time, and in that they throw money at things for feelings that they want to get, but they don't understand how to get them, so they think they can just throw money at things.
Yeah.
And this is like what capitalism has sold people as the notion of why they should do it, but over and over, people obviously, like, once they experience it, they understand that you can't duplicate a feeling and monetize it in a way that's like legitimate for actual emotions. And it's all like, you can take a pill to suppress your emotions, or you can take a pill to enhance your emotions, but the pill doesn't actually change what's there or how that thing can affect you at the end of the day. So there's this idea of like modifying oneself around problems to then allow the problem to persist and you to just ignore the problem so you can just like go along your day without having to deal with the consequences or acknowledge that this thing even exists anymore. And it's like people are able to purchase like insulated bubbles of existence that they perceive as real, but it's all artificial and constructed in a way that.
And then they can't change and get out of that cycle because of sunk cost fallacy.
Right. And then they want to. The thing about it, though, is like people want to be woke and talk about, oh, the Matrix, blah, blah, blah. But then when it comes time to like unplug, they don't want to. And that's kind of where.
Well, that's what Cypher taught
Exactly.
us.
And that's where I think a lot of people feel like they're Neo, but they're actually ciphers.
Yeah.
And I want to say most people are actually ciphers at the end of the day, and they don't want to actually.
Hey, that steak tastes real to them. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, but I think a lot of people would have probably still hate that character, and subconsciously are that character.
Well, Lucas, convinced a generation of men to idolize a clone. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that there's a character out there that people relate to without even realizing it.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to be the hero, but not everyone gets to be the hero. A lot of times, and this takes a lot of introspection and observation, but a lot of times when a person goes out, they're not even the main character. You got to like actively pursue a course of action that turns you into the main character.
Mm-hmm.
Passively going out and hanging out with people and talking about things at the bar doesn't turn you into any. Actually, that turns you into an extra.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's great that everyone wants to identify with Neo. I like to identify with Neo in ways, but there are also times where it's like, man, that's a really tough decision, and that's some heavy shit. And I think that's what life is, really. But we can't. Not everyone is ready to confront those things like in the moment. And we've created this society where we can delay things. We can just put it off.
Yeah.
And it's widely accepted. Procrastination is a thing. We have a word for it. It's no longer frowned upon. It's in some regards it's seen as a sign of, or a symbolic of the creative process, because sometimes you're not feeling it. You just gotta wait for inspiration to strike. But that doesn't even happen all the time.
In an episode of Star Trek, it's stated, Klingons do not procrastinate. They make tactical delays.
Yeah. There we go. That's it right there. It's a tactical delay.
And that's like fundamentally, I think the difference between that and procrastination is like
intent.
Yeah, intent. Because part of it is like, if you procrastinate just to put off your larger goal, it's different than putting it off for making it better.
Yeah.
Those are two completely different things.
The implication of one is that you just don't want to do it. And the other is you have to wait for the stars to align.
Yep.
And sometimes that takes a little while. But, even if Professor Farnsworth could create a machine that could move stars and Fry could spell out Leela's name in stars, I think on some level anything's really possible. We do have for all of the complaints that I have about Western culture, we do have a lot of opportunity in this country to achieve potential. And I like complaining about the Empire, but the Empire really does afford these opportunities in these really strange ways. And I can't like not acknowledge that I benefit from where I live, and that's just a genetic lottery. And of course, here, once you're in the United States and in the education system, it's really, it's always been a matter of you get what you put in.
Right.
And so, Neil Armstrong said that America is a great place because it unlocks potential. But then he also said that the only way that can work is if people whose potential is unlocked return back that kind of uh, effort into the system to enable other people to reach their potential.
Mm-hmm.
We can't produce astronauts if it becomes a closed gate or a gatekeeper laced system where you can only pass through if you meet all of the expectations of the next gatekeeper.
Right.
That's like a boss level video game. I think that's the reason that games like that have fallen the wayside to multiplayer games, cooperative games.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a fan of campaign-based games, but they they don't seem to be as prominently featured in gaming literature or in journalism.
Because you can't have a shared experience in a campaign.
Yeah.
Like, well, you can
in Halo.
or they have shared campaigns, but it's not the same as the individual campaign.
Yeah.
The story is constructed different, the play is different. The mechanics are different, and so there's all these things about traditional one-player campaigns that do not really make it conducive to discussion or the shared topic, like in that now especially the campaigns are meant to be individualized experiences, so two people are hardly ever going to have the same path, and then on that, like, people don't, it's not novel enough anymore that people get together and discuss the differences. Like Mass Effect, when people got together and discussed the quote-unquote differences in the endings, they realized that the endings weren't very different, and that it quickly made people hate the designers for trying to pull, like, for saying that they were going to have varied endings that were dependent upon your actions, and then basically making it like just blanket things for everyone.
That happened with the game Deus Ex, Infinity Wars, and pretty much all the Deus Ex games, I think.
Yeah.
But they had all these varied storylines, and you could do one storyline or mix and match all your way there, but at the end they would do some kind of, evaluation to see
what you did in the path you took, and it put together, like, I think it was like a 5 or 10 minute movie.
Yeah, and there were only like 4 of them. There were 3 or 4 paths at the end that resulted in it. And if you wanted to beat the game and not choose sides, you basically become this like cyborg that can't exist in normal society anymore. It's a really dark theme.
I mean, yeah, it was a dystopian game, but the endings just weren't different enough. No. Again, that's where
they were all dystopian. There was no salvation at the end of it.
Yeah.
It was almost like all those efforts didn't matter, because at the end you emerge an individual that is tied to one alignment.
Yep.
One of the alignments.
But that's again where I think what ends up happening is there's not a whole lot of actual creativity coming out of the West in the last 100 years, in that it gets stuck in dystopian what's the word? There's platitudes about how dystopian we could become because we're already dystopian, and then it just like is like an echo chamber of woe is us.
Isn't that just dystopian satire at that point?
That's what it's become, in that it's like too like when you're in a dystopian society, if you make dystopian media, then it becomes like a masturbatory exercise that doesn't actually get you anywhere.
Yeah.
So then it just becomes like an echo chamber of like people wailing over their inability to get out of the situation, and then that's like how, like, capitalism has made it so then people will pay money to be fed the narrative that you're stuck paying money to
you just reminded me,
be sad about your situation.
You just reminded me of the movie Brazil, Terry Gilliam's Brazil. It's a dystopian future. It was in the, I think it was made in the 80s actually, but there's this one scene where all these people are sitting down in this restaurant having their fancy dinner, and then there's an explosion, and everyone just puts on their blinders and they keep on eating.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And then there's another one where someone is misidentified. It's like a swatting thing, and he was making a joke about it in the 80s, but it's very real now. But what ended up happening is this SWAT team descends into this home, like through the windows, through the ceiling, through the door, through the wall, through the floor, every entrance point imaginable, and some that aren't even imaginable entrance points, they come through. And then they get there, and they're like, wait, this is the wrong guy. He lives next door. Quick, next door. And it's like, that was a joke in the 80s. And this shit happens now, for real.
Yeah.
And not just for real, like, it's a joke that people play on people now. There's like...
Yeah, for sure.
It's so... That's how fucked up our society's become. People think that's a good measure of retaliation.
It has... I'll say, so this is, again, it was always this bad.
Yeah.
Like, so one of the things that Watchmen was, like, good about was not whitewashing historical grossness of humans. So, like, there's this scene where somebody's, like, dragging people who got lynched behind their car as if it's, like, no big deal. And it's like, yeah, that's what people used to, like, less than 100 years ago.
Well,
so it's like the SWAT thing is just those fucking sociopathic people's kids just with phones now.
Yeah.
It's like we always had sociopaths. We always had fucked, like, if anything,
Matthew Shepard wasn't the first gay guy to get dragged behind a
not
truck.
at all.
He was the first one that got attention.
Exactly. And this is where what we have now is like a mechanism to bring attention to the lowest people and those that are like downtrodden, that never had voices before. And this is why you end up with all these people who like complain about PC culture and like not being able to talk like they used to and how things used to be, when basically everybody ignored like plight. There's most of, what was it, fucking most of human history is just people ignoring plight. And I think that's kind of where it's just it's easy for us to like look back on all these events and say these things are terrible because we have access to information. But I do think we have the capacity to judge those people at the same time, in that everyone has a choice to act. And there's all these periods in history where people go along with like the morally corrupt majority just because the majority's already doing it. So like, oh, okay, well, just go along with it.
Yeah.
Fuck those people. And my thing is those
are the people who will still support Democratic Party actions even though they've been involved in all sorts of atrocities throughout the last, probably all of that person's life, or Republican Party, or insert any political organization. There's always some layer of subterfuge where, oh, look at all the good things we're doing, and that's just the surface. And then you go a few hallways in, and you realize that they're just as corrupt as any other institution out there.
And that's kind of where we get to this point that it's, I mean, I don't know how many times we can talk about the illusion of left and right, but it's more so the people who are like wholeheartedly convinced that the left wing is drastically different from the right wing in our parties. Like, obviously, ideologically, they're very different, but in action, they are there's very little difference at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is many people don't want to admit that to themselves, because once you admit it to yourself, then you have to look outside of that system for actual solutions, because then it's like, oh, the problems are being exacerbated by this system.
Well, you know, it's funny. I think the way that the media portrays political parties globally, they would have us believe that our conservatives are the same as the conservatives in England, and our liberals are the same as the liberals in England. But the reality is, our most liberal people are still more conservative than the most conservative people in the United Kingdom.
Right.
They're not trying to take away social health care. They're not trying to, undermine social services. They're not trying to destroy communities. They're arguing about how to conduct trade.
Well, and this just like
Or you go to Europe and it's still way leftism, liberal ideology in Europe is still vastly more liberal.
Yeah.
Than
Oh
it is
God,
here.
yeah. Well, you realize that liberals still enjoy punishing people.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, with the idea of forgiving student loan debt, there's people who will call themselves liberal, who will say, "Oh no, I don't want to forgive student loans because then that punishes people who paid their loans." Like, there are left-wing people.
Yeah,
Like, I expect a right-wing person to say some dumbass shit like that.
Yeah, that's like the right wing. That's
But
the left-wing
when
equivalent.
left-wing people say that shit, it's like, what the fuck is
That's the that's the left-wing equivalent of the right wing saying they don't want to pay a $15 minimum wage because then that person would be making as much as somebody who works in an ambulance.
Right.
When the reality is, the person who's working in an ambulance should be paid more than $15 an hour.
Take out the occupation.
The occupation
A person
doesn't matter.
who's working should be paid a living wage.
Exactly.
Period. It don't matter what the fuck they're doing.
No, I agree. And
if it's a job,
and it needs to be adjusted by region for like the cost of living.
I mean,
It has
exactly. But the issue is, if it's a job that requires someone to do it, then that person needs to be paid a fucking living wage. Period.
Yeah.
And this is like fundamentally,
It's like
that shouldn't be a question. But you have people who will argue that.
They'll argue a straw man of that ambulance driver needs to be paid or shouldn't be paid the same as a person who works at McDonald's.
I mean, but that's
straw
why.
man that shit.
But this is where I'm saying take out the occupation, because then if once you take out the occupation, then it forces them to acknowledge that there are situations in which they are willing to not pay a person a living wage, and it forces them to qualify those things.
Without
because
the
it's
straw
like,
man.
I mean,
the arguments are always hidden behind straw man.
right? And this is where I'm saying, like, that's the only way to actually defeat that straw man, is like getting it down to a point where we're not, because this gets back to left-wing people still have a hierarchy of what they believe is important too. They'll like go along with that argument and not even think about what they're doing in the process of like ranking priorities of civilization. Like, so if you have people who drink coffee, the person who serves coffee is somehow less important than the fucking
coffee.
EMT. I mean, how is that EMT gonna fucking get to work if they don't have their coffee?
I think that the person who works in the fields and grows the coffee probably should be paid adequately too, but I'm almost positive that they're not.
Of course, unless it's fair trade, they're definitely not.
Yeah.
But that person is just, and again, this gets back to, if we call ourselves a society, we can't start ranking importance based on what we think is like hierarchically the thing that we need most as a society, because that's something that happens based on relative need. And it's like, well, when you're hungry, you need the farmer and the cook the most. You don't need the doctor right then. When you're sick, you need the doctor. You don't need the farmer and the cook, or you don't need the electrician. And there's all these times when like rank of importance is obviously relative. So it sounds absurd to say, oh, the person who flips burgers should be seen as equal as a doctor. But when you actually break it down, you can't start ranking the importance, because then it's like, let's say all of the people who know how to cook are Thanos snapped away all of a sudden, and you're left with a bunch of people who don't know how to fucking
cook anything.
Tell when meat's done.
Ugh.
And then they start fucking dying from E. coli because people aren't cooking their meat right. It sounds stupid, but it's like then you have an epidemic that the doctors can't fix because nobody knows how to cook the fucking meat right. And
Yep.
it's an issue of like, well, it's not even just meat because you can get E. coli from fucking romaine lettuce too. So
Just not washing your hands properly.
if you're not having people who know how to prepare food correctly, then that can be something that is it trumps the doctor's capacity to fix it.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, it's like this. It may sound stupid to say that these people have equal value at the end of the day, but again, it's like we're at this point where we want to make hierarchies.
I think that, well, of course, the problem is that they want to. We have an economy that's based on the promise of future labor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the dilemma, is that we have people who commit extreme large amounts of time to studying this one thing that, somebody needs it.
Mm.
We need neurosurgeons. We need surgeons. We don't need them all the time, but when we need them, we need them.
Yep.
And we've got a complex legal system that has placed so many constraints on liability and insurance that prices skyrocket. We can't control that because doctors don't want to get sued for, the person dying on the table when it's not even a certainty that they could save the person on the table in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But we want our doctors to be superheroes because we see them on TV saving people in all these, fictional scenarios that should never play out. So it's like the Disney princess syndrome. We're given a false sense of security based upon the media. And then shit doesn't work out like that because not everyone is a super doctor, and someone dies, malpractice suit, insurance rates go up, medical costs go up. So because the doctor's rates go up, now the hospital has to pay out more for their own liability, and so it's a horrible tangled mess.
Mm-hmm.
After a while, because no matter how far you follow the chain of liability, nobody wants to pay at the end of the day. The insurance company's job is to protect their shareholders, not their customers, and that's backwards. There shouldn't be shareholders profiting off of people's, illnesses or mental instability or physical ailments or accidents. That's the part that blows my mind, is we have an industry that makes money off of other people getting hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I need to say that again. There is an industry that exists in our civilization whose sole intent is to profit from the pain and suffering of other people.
Yeah, and I don't think people really take a step back to understand the implications of that, because it seems such a disconnected web that has no spider's head.
Yeah.
That it makes no sense to try to tackle it, when really it was propped up and created by government protecting private industry, and then the illusion was perpetuated by private industry in that you have so much propaganda and media made to influence people to make them think that this is the best it could possibly be, that I don't know if you saw that video when they were asking British people what they thought shit cost in America.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of them
They're
didn't
shocked.
they couldn't conceive that any of these things cost money in the first place.
Yeah.
But then when they were guessing how much this shit cost, it was way off.
Oh yeah.
And in the process,
100 times more in some cases.
Yeah, in the process, it's Americans don't even question that shit. It's so ingrained in their being that they don't even question the cost of these things.
Yeah. Like a broken arm in America is $1,000, but a broken arm in the United Kingdom is $40 or something like that.
Right.
It's something so out of proportion that it doesn't seem right. Although I did see a comparison of UK and US packaging for nutritional information for food.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the comment is like, look at this. In the United Kingdom, ketchup only has 5 ingredients, but in America, it has all of these, and half of them I can't even pronounce. And most of them are actually really easy to pronounce if you just try, but most
Mm-hmm.
people look at those chemical names and are like, oh, and then their head pops. But the reality is, those chemicals exist in those 5 ingredients that are just not required to put them on the packaging.
Mm.
So there are weird social incongruities that create these misunderstandings that Heinz ketchup in the United Kingdom is vastly different from Heinz ketchup in the United States. When, I mean, it might be a little different because they have different water,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a that's a really really big fish to pull.
I don't think they put as much sugar in non-American ketchup.
Yeah.
Like, in just period.
Yeah, I think sugar in America is out of control. They put it in
Mhm.
milk.
Yeah, put in everything.
Milk
where
is
you're
sweet.
like,
Milk shouldn't need sweeteners. It gets added to cereal. Cereal
Yeah.
has the sweetener.
or like corn syrup gets added to jelly and shit like that, where you're like, well,
What?
why? I know you need sugar, but why go ahead and add corn syrup?
Why do we need to add
So,
the crack of sugar to
Yeah.
something?
I don't know. It's hard to like look at the influence of big business using their waste byproducts and pawning them off on Americans as like legitimate products, while these things influence the American physical existence, and not see it as like just a big experiment, because that's kind of where these things are happening in a way that are compartmentalized enough that you can see, like, I was discussing this with somebody yesterday, like, you can see the difference in physical makeup from where someone, like, when you look at the internal organs, the fatty deposits and the density of shit can show you where people are from. And it's like partially due to the weather conditions, but it's also partially due to the local diet. And that's kind of where,
And the local culture of physical activity.
yeah, and that, you know, there's a lot of these things that, like, we look down upon people who walk places.
I mean, I used to walk everywhere, so
Yeah, and
I
guess
don't
what?
think I do, but
You probably had like people who wouldn't date you at the time because you were walking more.
yeah.
And it's like, if they thought that you didn't have a car, like you weren't dateable or some shit like that, where it's like there's all these things about like Western society that we have social conventions that we don't even question,
Yeah.
as far as like what is the long-term implication of this thing specifically, where it's like, if you're like a male and you have to have a car to be a viable mate, just out of the gate, that forces like,
I think in Indiana you have to have a big truck.
right, I mean, it's gonna be like
Some variation.
regional variation.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's like one of these things that socially, like, if you don't have a car as a male, you're not a viable.
Yeah. Well, you know, I remember back in the rave days, I think her name was Catherine. We were I don't even remember whose apartment we were at. We were talking about bumping systems, and I made the statement that the bumping system is essentially like the mating call for, you know, for a modern day. It's just a mating call. And then you started laughing, and then I said, "What's up?" And you're like, "Well, then Catherine is like large and in charge." And I look over, and she's just snickering, and it's like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Oh, we just installed this like 3,000 watt like 412 bandpass, you know, bad mamma jamma. You can hear it like a mile away." And we're just like start cracking up, because it's like, well, here's this woman who has taken this to this whole, like, holy shit, like, and it sounded good too. I remember it sounded really good. It wasn't just loud and big and in charge. It actually sounded good. And so that took it to this whole different level of like, not only is she like, I'm here, I have landed, I have arrived, but I have a bigger, badder bass box than you. And so I always thought that was kind of interesting. But I still believe that it's a thing. Not so much anymore because the subwoofer culture has diminished over time.
Well, because it's not expensive anymore, so
Yeah.
it's not a display of wealth.
Exactly.
That's what it comes down to.
And
Same shit with rims. Like,
yep.
now that rims are cheap, people don't get them because it's not a peacock thing
Yep.
anymore.
Now it's just about how much money you can throw at the engine and fast. It's back
Yeah,
to
because you see like these race
inspired
street cars. Yeah, where
impossible to drive on the road.
Right. That's the like peak of it now, where it's like, you know, the full decals and fucking Tokyo Drift looking.
the race inspired cosmetic enhancement, the rice.
Yeah.
I always thought rice was amusing.
Well, because it's like even shitty cars that are not expensive are outfitted to look like
A race car.
A race car for that reason now. And again,
Yeah.
it's like it's these things are happening in a way where it's obviously meant to cater to aesthetic preference that the guys think that the girls want, or whatever is informing it. But there's something that is informing it, and obviously it's going to be like media or some shit.
Yeah.
But again, that's where people are aware of it, but not enough that they want to change it.
No. My experience with sports cars has been there are very few sports cars that can be daily driven and are comfortable enough to actually enjoy all the time. And most sports cars you can really only enjoy during certain months of the year because the weather is compliant.
Right.
And because you don't want to tempt fate with, you know, a bunch of sand or salt or whatever on the roads destroying your paint job, because that's an expensive car. And everyone else is driving the speed limit, so you can't really go fast. And all of the fun roads don't get any attention because they're underserviced, so they deteriorate.
Right.
So you run the risk of damaging your sports car no matter what you do. The few that are fun to drive that I've had, you know, practical experience with over time. Even a Mustang gets old after a while, and I think that the excitement of having a really fast car, unless you're able to take it to a track regularly and really learn how to drive it, like for real, it's tempting fate.
Mm-hmm.
And the allure just diminishes quickly, because the reality is we want to be comfortable. We want to get somewhere quickly. We want to get there in style. But we want to be comfortable, first and foremost. Nobody really wants to sit on the floor of a car that's got such stiff suspension that you feel every little crack in the road.
Mm.
It's only exciting for like the first few times. And then you spend all your time looking for roads that aren't like that.
Mm-hmm. And avoiding speed bumps.
And there's that one crack in the road on your way to wherever you go all the time that you avoid, and then but during peak traffic you can't avoid it, so you have to eat it. There's no way. It's that whole era of you know, open roads and freedom is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been replaced by cars that are really fast and aren't interesting. They're just normal. Sedans are sedans, and they're nice. They're spaceships, but they're not. They don't. I don't know. My 2015 Mazda is the best handling, quickest, best fuel economy car I've ever had in my life, and I've had faster cars and I've had more powerful engines, but the older I get, the more I want safety and comfort, and I don't need neck snapping acceleration all the time, because you can only snap your neck so many times before it stops working.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, but this gets back to the idea of having one thing that fits all your situations. Because again, it's like, that's why you have a car and a truck.
That's true. I do have a truck. And if I had my way, I'd have more vehicles, because I would specialize them further.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's my personality, and that's something that is unlocked by the American system. is that the potential is there to do all these things. Just,
I mean, but that's okay. So this is where like it's more valued hierarchically to own something than to rent or share something.
yeah.
But if you were able to, there's systems out that are available that you can like rent a car for a period, and if you don't like it, you can just switch it out.
Yeah.
So that's the service, is like you drive whatever you want for the whatever. Like if you want to drive the same car for 12 months, you can.
But what kind of adoption rate would we have to have for this to be widespread and viable for everyone? We'd have to have everyone do it.
I mean,
because some people are always going to want to have their personal vehicle.
it's a matter of like the cars would have to be built differently, and that's the problem. Is like they're built not to be easily modifiable. But if they're built to be modifiable, then it would be different in that, like, if you had one car that could be, like, okay, first off, only one person can drive a car at a time.
Yeah.
True. Am I crazy for that?
There are teachers. There are student driving courses where they have vehicles that have.
You have two hands, but you can't both drive it at the same time.
You'd be fighting somebody.
Exactly.
And
only one. Even if there's two controls, only one person can drive a car at a time, right?
And even in an airplane where you have two sets of controls,
only one person is driving at a time.
The second set's really to assist the pilot.
I mean, that's like if
and that's an old style of airplane where they still have hydraulic systems.
Right.
And it's not fly-by-wire. Because
Yeah.
fly-by-wire, you have a joystick that has no resistance. So.
But again, that's a specific type of plane. I'm talking about a car, because again, it's like what you're talking about is because a single individual isn't strong enough. Like before power steering, you may have needed two people to pull a fucking wheel
on a big ass truck.
Right, at a certain period. Like, not that every person would have been incapable, but sometimes people would have needed help.
Yeah.
Like if they weren't strong enough. So that's not what I mean in the sense of
under normal conditions.
You can't have a car where the one person is turning left and the other person is turning right and have it make an actual directional decision.
Yeah.
That's not how cars work.
No, it's not.
Right?
Well, there are stunt cars, but that's a very, very unique outlier.
But those don't work like that.
Those can't even
those
be
still
driven on
don't
the
work
road.
like that.
Yeah, they can't even be driven on the road.
And what I'm saying is, you're talking about two separate systems at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not one system. Only one person can be in control of one system.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, if you have all our cars are fucking sitting there because we can't drive them. Somebody should be able to come pick our fucking car if they're needed to use it. In the sense of like, that's what that thing is for. It's not meant to sit there.
Yeah.
But because we own our shit, it's like, oh, we got to make sure that it's sitting, like, if we're not using it, we got to make sure nobody else is using it, because that's our thing.
Yeah.
And nobody else is meant to use it. We customize it to our liking. So over time, every time we get into it, it's for us. But there gets a point where it either breaks down or you get sick of it and then you sell it or get rid of it or whatever and move into something else.
Because they're designed to fail. They're not.
I mean, forget even the design to fail. Like, styles change, preferences change. So it's like, if you have a car when you're 16, when you're 75 years old, you're not going to want the same car. So ultimately, the idea of an individual purchasing a car permanently is kind of stupid. And this is where it's like, when we're trying to break down the things we do, if we come with these different approaches, if I'm trying to present an alternative approach, because everybody's doing it a certain way, I sound fucking stupid for saying, like, why doesn't everybody share more modifiable cars? But at the same time, it's obviously a better solution to long-term existence to have a easily modded cars.
It reminds me of the whole bike share systems that they've implemented in Europe, where there are bicycles everywhere, and they've cut down traffic incidents dramatically. Like every that's like one of the selling points, like safer traffic flow, better traffic. Everyone has a bike, less problems, places to put them, more freed up parking, all these things. And taxis have better accessibility now. and public transportation improves because now public transportation isn't fighting a sea of automobiles. There is a big component of American individuality
Yeah.
in what you describe.
Hold on. Well, okay, I'll give you an example that's being done with shoes because the problem is the producers and manufacturers do not make it so that the supply chain accepts the products back into it. So what they've done is kids who are growing can now get into a program where they pay like it's either $20 or $30 a month, and they can just switch out their shoes as they need.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, but the issue is the shoes get sent back to fucking Nike and they just reuse the fabric. So this is where, again, it's like when you buy a car, the company that you bought the car, the first off, the company sold it to a dealership most likely, and then that dealership sold it to you. So it's like already removed from the producer. But if you could take that car back and they'll say, yeah, we'll fucking break down the parts and reuse them.
So
it's a whole different fucking cycle.
Mazda has this program for their Miatas where you send it back to them and they completely factory restore it. They will absolutely completely bring it back up to 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure that's...
I mean, but I'm saying if it's a 20-year-old Miata, why aren't they putting a whole new fucking body on it?
I think that they replace anything that has to be replaced.
But I'm not talking replacing. I'm talking about putting a fucking new style body. Like,
oh, I see what you're
if
saying.
you have a 2000 Miata, you bring that Miata back to the
you get
factory.
A 2019 or 2020.
Exactly, on the same frame, but they put it through the fucking mold, like, and just put a different mold on it. And that's what I'm saying, like, if people could just take their frames back and just get a different mold put on.
You know, that's actually very similar to the way that Volkswagen has designed all of their car. It's called a mobile or modular automobile platform. And so they use the same platform for like all of their vehicles. They just change certain components and then body panels.
Mm-hmm.
But like the Golf and or maybe it's the Golf and the Jetta are the same car. And then those things have structural components that are similar with the Passat, which has the same, is almost identical in many ways to the Tiguan. And then they all share components as they get bigger up and through their bigger vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And so they managed to reduce the total diversity of machines they used to build the vehicles, and they're now doing it with greater diversity of software. Because it knows what it's installing.
Yep.
And so they've streamlined their entire process. More cars share parts, which means it's easier to find parts for any of the vehicles. They have they have a unified production model in a sense. And so at some point, what you're saying, if we were to take that model a little further, at some point, somebody whose family's growing, they start off out of college, they buy a Golf, 4-door hatchback, but eventually they get married, so they need a trunk so they can take it back, and then they swap out the back end and they add the trunk situation. But then they have a kid, so they need to move up in size, so they take it in, and then the chassis expansion modules get attached, and now they have a Passat.
And it would be, if it was made to do that, it would clearly be long-term cheaper for both sides.
Because all components at that point are modular, and they can be replaced more easily.
Exactly.
So long-term maintenance is achievable in the sense that we know that they're not trying to make it last forever. They're just trying to make it serviceable over time. Yeah.
And this is why, again, it's like that notion it's like not even in mainstream American thought. Like, as you're pointing out, there's like full-on companies that are moving towards that model. Because then they're even, I think they're one of, it's them and Mercedes, I believe, that are, there's like, they're looking to get, like, to build a full-on automobile-sized 3D printer that can print a whole car with moving parts and everything. But it's like, to scale that up, they've had to put in so much money into R&D that it's been like, I think 5 or 6 years that they've been working on this shit. So it's like,
that sounds like a Mercedes project.
I think Mercedes has one for sure, but I also think Volkswagen does. So I believe there's two that are being attempted.
I know that there's been a lot of headway made in terms of 3D printing of materials that aren't plastic.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah.
And like, we've talked about, like, 3D printed food, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of cool. But I think the idea of 3D printing, not just structural components but actual mechanical components, like, in place,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
like that's like let's grow an arm on an Android type situation,
Mm-hmm.
and
I
that's
mean, with working electronic parts and
yeah,
or like the working wiring and shit
yeah,
too, because that's like the initial stages of it was like being able to arrange molecules and then produce materials that were um, like their uh, naturally occurring counterparts. So like steel or iron or whatever, in the sense of like getting the so like if you were 3D printing a wrench, it would the original stuff would have been more like plastic, but they got it to a point where they could arrange the molecules, so then it actually became
like a metal
like a
matrix of sort.
metal, like titanium, whatever
Yeah.
metal that they chose. The molecular structure could be the consistency and density of the materials that were being produced. So it was
Oh
like that
wow.
stage came next, and then it was moving like the moving parts had happened before that, but it was a matter of being able to get the molecular structure and the moving parts in one machine, and then it was like the wiring came after that. So there's been all these stages of like progressing how the 3D printer is being um, put together. So then also then when you take it in tandem with simulation uh, algorithms, then the 3D printer can then take in information and modify uh, blueprints based on novel information to then start 3D printing like situation specific um, uh, products. So like for example, like one of the examples that's given is if you're on Mars and you have a trench that needs to be crossed by a rover, but it's a very specific trench, then this algorithm will be able to like gauge the terrain, run a bunch of simulations, and then 3D print the best structure specifically to cross that terrain. And that's like ultimately those things are already in existence that would then be like the robot 3D printer that would be on the spaceship. It's like it's not on the spaceship.
It is the spaceship, and it's the robot, and it's the rover. 'Cause they're
Well,
all linked.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I'm saying the technology already exists. It's not in place yet.
Yeah.
And I think they had sent one printer up to the ISS that is like one of the more recent models that allows them to print the moving parts and shit.
That's cool.
But it's not the one that prints the full-on robots yet.
Mm.
Because this is the one I was discussing.
Hey, if they still need a person to assemble something at some stage, that's fine for now. That's cool.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean,
We
it
can-
like 3D prints the robot fully assembled.
Yeah.
And it's already like, it's because it needs to make sure the joints are in the right place and all that shit. So
Yeah.
that's where it's like, the autonomy becomes such a high level at that point that, you know, like you're saying, it is the spaceship and the crew and everything all in one.
You know, that's the thing. I remember when 3D printers first came on the consumer market. I remember looking into it and looking at available projects,
Mm-hmm.
and the vast majority of them were to print larger versions of the components of the first 3D printer, so you can build a larger 3D printer afterwards. So really, the first printer is just to build a larger printer, and then after that, then you can start making interesting things.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, it's like when you find somebody who actually has a 3D printer, it's like really difficult to find shit to make. That's
Yeah.
like, it's like,
That's worth making.
right. It seems like it'd be really cool to have, but it's like, what are you gonna?
Well, the original, the first several batches of them, they were using this plastic that when they were using it, it would basically fill this microscopic plastic gas inside the chamber. It would just
Mm.
spray it around, and if you didn't have a sealed enclosure, you could inhale this
Oh
shit.
no.
Yeah, it's like really
That
bad.
sounds really
It
bad.
was
Yeah.
like horrible, like chest cold
Yeah.
that doesn't want to go away because your body's like, I don't know what to do with this.
Right, and then it probably hardens in your lungs and
Yeah,
shit.
it is really bad. But I think I'm pretty sure they've solved that now because I don't read about people dying from 3D printing.
Hmm.
The thing that I always thought was, the thing that I always wanted to make, or the things that I always wanted to make were really simple things, like little hooks or little things that I could use to get cables out of the way, but not have them secured for all time. Um, just little variations of things that I've had before, like a cable winder,
Hmm.
but I needed one that was just a little bit bigger, or I needed one that was easier to pack away, or just like, I think of it now and it's kind of, well, that's kind of dumb, but these are practical utility devices that would have been easy to make.
But the cost of it,
The-
3D printing
Shit.
would have made it so that
Yeah,
it wouldn't be
I would have
worth
had
it.
to I would have had to tool up, and it would have cost me close to $2,000 to make a couple $100 worth of accessories or
Hmm.
utility pieces that allow me to hang things or suspend things or to wrap things up, and that's one of those, like, well, okay, so if I'm in a remote location and I need this kind of and I need that kind of stuff, but I can't bring all of it. I can't bring an entire store worth of stuff with me. Yeah, this makes sense. If I'm,
I mean,
but even then,
I was gonna say it doesn't seem possible that you can't, like, you would, if you have a 3D printer, you would have to bring enough material
Yeah.
to print.
So these are
that's
all just
the equivalent of
these
what
are
you
all
needed.
just like rationalizations
Yeah.
for owning a 3D printer. But the reality is that we live in an industrial society that can produce all of these things for far more efficiently and far more cost effectively than an individual can.
Hmm. I mean, here I'll pose this question to you: do you have a regular printer?
Yes,
How often do you use it?
once or twice a week,
And then how often do you have to change your ink?
regularly.
So then, how
Ink-
much do your ink?
Ink is
How much does your ink cost?
okay. So I've had this experience before where it's for certain types of printers, like laser printers, and well, now we know that guy in that truck has somewhere to be and that they're not important. Uh, um, so with laser printers and inkjets where you got to replace these tiny cartridges, it's a pain in the ass, and it's actually, you can almost buy a new printer with the ink cartridge or the toner in it already for almost the same price as a new cartridge
Yep.
or new toner or whatever. And then of course these smaller printers aren't designed to be serviced, they're designed to be thrown away. So when
Yep.
the rollers wear out, it's done. We have a HP Bad Mama Jamma built for an office
So
printer.
it's not for an individual.
It's not
an
an
industrial printer.
It's an industrial office grade printer.
Yep.
It has user serviceable parts. I can order new rollers. The ink packs are huge. So we replace them, once a year. Sheila
So you're
prints
not talking as an individual, you're talking as an office now. So
Yeah.
this is the difference between, like, you're not using things that are made for you as an individual.
Yeah.
And that's what this is what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
is
I've
like,
already stepped up to this level with just my normal printer that we had requirements where we needed to be able to make copies, we needed to be able to fax. Even as silly as it sounds, the fax machine is still in use regularly today because it's such an embedded device. But we need to be able to fax, we need to be able to copy, we need to be able to scan things, we need to be able to do all these things, and that's 5 different devices. And who has space for that? I don't actually have an actual office printer room. I have like an all-in-one office industrial printer that sits on top of a filing cabinet because that's the space for it. Not everyone has that requirement for that kind of printer. And I also had when I was younger, I worked for
But the
IU.
thing is, if you have any requirement for a printer, that's the only one that's worth it.
Yeah, really is.
Otherwise, you're paying for something that you're gonna have to throw away
Yeah,
once you're done with the ink.
yeah. This
Like,
replacing the ink on this one is actually easier than any other because it has this panel that opens up on the side. It's not confused by any other things that have to move out of the way. You don't have to move paper out of the way. You don't have to move any other shit. You don't have to press a special button to move the cartridge or the ink tray over.
mm-hmm.
It slides in. I close the panel. I press calibrate, and boom, done.
Yep.
And then it's got space for like 2 reams of paper, so I actually forget about paper because it holds so much paper. And if it was a real office, there were like 10 or 20 people printing regularly, then we would use paper all the time. But we use it regularly. We haven't worn out any of the rollers yet, and I'm waiting for that to happen because when I was younger, I worked at IU in residential IT. And so we had this big old seminar about the printers that they use, those huge industrial grade printers. And, they're like, oh, we replace the rollers on these kind of timetables. We end up replacing toner regularly. There's toner in the places. There are rollers in the print facilities. And we're going to show you how to use them all and how to replace it. And it wasn't hard. It was actually really easy to do all this stuff. It's just no one would know how to do these things if they didn't have to do them. And you don't have to use those printers unless you're at a university or in a large office. And no one's going to own one of those things that are in their house because it's the size of a refrigerator, or the footprint is a refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are a lot of compromises we make with our technology. Like, I don't use your standard consumer grade desktop computer. I run workstation grade hardware because I have long uptime and run times, and I end up doing things that require leveraging the power of a database, and I want it to be quick. I don't like waiting on those things. But at the same time, I'm not using a current generation top of the line mainstream processor because the price to performance ratio isn't good enough for me to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on that when I can build that workstation for less.
Well, it's just like the GPU cards were so jacked up that it was like briefly more expensive, or it was cheaper to buy a whole computer to get a graphics card than to buy the graphics card on its own.
I remember that for a while.
Like, I bought a computer for like $500. It was like $550, and the graphics card in it was $700 alone. Like, if I would have bought the graphics card alone, it would have been $700, not including anything else to make a computer work. But somehow, because the computer had been pre-assembled before the graphics cards had their prices spiked by speculators. And this gets back to like why at a certain point I get frustrated with like profit as a motive, because ultimately if profit is the motive, then that's making whatever the thing is the secondary
the product
focus.
The product is not the actual outcome. The product
product becomes secondary to profit.
Yeah.
And that's a major problem.
It's a byproduct of profit.
Yeah. In the framing of profit as the main motive. And this is why, like, when we're in a capitalist society, it sounds ridiculous to say that profit should not be the main driving motive, because we've been taught that profit is everything. But then when you analyze...
Oh my God, when did America become the Ferengi?
I mean, it's
always been the Ferengi.
It always has been, but that's the whole joke about the Ferengi is like, it's meant to, I mean, even down to them being disgusted by naked women, like,
or clothed women.
No, the clothed women are the attractive, right?
No, they wanted the women naked. She's wearing clothes.
No, because they can't control themselves. It's like they're so turned on by the clothed women that they have to restrict themselves, because that's the whole, like, I thought that was the joke, is like they want them naked because when they're clothed they're too attractive so that they have to avert their eyes. It's like too overstimulating
Yeah,
for them
it's
to wear
funny.
clothes, and that's why it's supposed to be like the opposite
Yeah.
of fucking Americans in that.
But it's like not the opposite.
Right. Yeah. Because
Because
then the earlobes, like anytime the women rub their earlobes, they just can't make any conscious
they can't do
decisions.
anything.
Yeah. So it's this whole like like obviously the Ferengi are meant to like be a caricature of toxic masculinity, but this was before toxic masculinity was even a concept or a term.
Well, yeah, they called it machismo.
Right.
Back in the
Or bravado.
or gusto.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was positive.
Yeah, you wanted to have gusto.
You wanted to be, you know, if you had bravado, you were like the good
man.
guy, or the hero. Because then, you know, we were talking about this yesterday. Like, there's a couple of scenes in Indiana Jones films where he's like just straight fucking sexually assaulting the chick. But that was normal at the time, and it's like he gets a pass in the film because she finally like lets it happen. But then there's like another time when they're discussing like when they used to date, and she was like, I was a kid, Indy, and like there's all these things that are implied about and we see about this character, but he's the fucking hero at the time.
Yeah.
So that's where it's just this weird like. You know, the Ferengi as social commentary came at a time, I think, when we were evolving ethically, but it was we're still stuck in that, you know, bully bravado time. So I think that's kind of where it was. I still you know, we were watching Star Trek TNG last night, and there's all these things about it that it seems like it wants to be progressive, but then it takes these steps back. Like, you know, you have the guidance counselor who's famous for her cleavage, and it's like, on the one, you know, then there's even at one point there's like a time when another captain comes on and requests that she wears more appropriate clothing for the bridge. So they're like making social commentary about her clothing and people's perceptions of her clothing, but it's all in this weird like it's self-aware of what's happening at the time, but it can't escape from it, in that even in the show they come in and basically slut shame.
Yeah. I think it's hard for shows that are trying to push social boundaries, because, or to tell good stories and to remain true to the intent of the story, because at some point the social standards will always change. There's a show called The L Word. It was on Showtime a decade ago, and it was like the lesbian version of Sex and the City, and they're bringing it back. And I heard this interview on NPR where, you know, one of the producers, the showrunners, was talking about how they've gotten a lot of flack for their the way that they introduced a transgender character, and they're like, well, we didn't know anything. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what the rules were. None of the rules existed. They didn't realize that they made a mistake by casting a non-trans actor as a trans role. But up until that point, no trans actors were getting cast.
Right.
So it wasn't a widely known thing. And so they made an error, but it wasn't like they set out to do that.
Right.
And they made a bunch of, you know, she said that she made mistakes. They all made mistakes along the way, but they tried to reconcile them. And my understanding is that show helped LGBTQ culture in ways that were, you know, the impact is still being felt in a positive way.
Oh, for sure.
And it's obviously they're getting their show back, so it's being reflected in as such. You know, they have the power to have impact.
Well, I think the L Word was one of the first times that they like showed lesbians non uh, heterosexual male lens
Yeah.
that was like, this is a lesbian show by lesbian, like for lesbians and not for the male gaze. And I think that was like one of the first times that it had been done in that manner.
I've only seen a couple episodes of it, but I thought that the stories were interesting. The stories were interesting. The acting was actually superb.
Yeah.
And it was like this glimpse into this world that, I mean, I have friends who are lesbians, but I have no idea what's going on.
Well, and that's kind of why I was never interested in that, and that's like, it's just normal life for lesbians.
Yeah, I know.
And that's where it was like, put them on a fucking spaceship or something, and I'll watch it. Like, like
lesbians in space.
Right, like I don't like, I know lesbians have normal lives. Otherwise, I don't. I mean, I don't.
I think that's why
it was just never.
I think that was the positive aspect of it, is that up until these stories are being told on a broad scale, it's like this weird illusion. We don't know what's going on. The only things that people know are these caricatures that are presented by media, or the bubbly lipstick lesbian.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that exists, but
well,
I'm also pretty sure that was fabricated.
That's for sure. It's for the male gaze, and this gets back to like, so speaking of lesbians in space, the Legends of Tomorrow, their captain is a lesbian. I guess she's bi technically, but they do an episode about like they're time travelers, obviously, but one of the episodes is like,
her and the chief of the time bureau, that chick.
Well, that they're dating, but in one of the time, like they go back into the 40s or 50s before women are liberated, basically, and the plot is like, just one of the people that she meets is like a nurse who hasn't come out, and it's like they allude to those, like the captain basically romancing this woman into coming out in a way that's like, it pulls the whole Kirk trope and like flips it on its head knowingly, in a way that's where I'm like, that's the kind of fucking lesbian story I want to see, because I don't watch like normal hetero shit anyway. So that's where I'm like, yeah, let's see some like lesbian time travelers liberating lesbians in the past and some shit like that. That's like, that's the type,
I'd actually be down for a female interpretation of Kirk, being as
that's kind of how they play her,
being like full on, like almost a reprisal or a channeling of Kirk as a character into a female captain, because I think that what show was it? Oh, it's like Dark Matter.
Yeah.
There's a female captain. She is. She's
badass.
in charge. She's a badass. She can kick.
That show's awesome.
Ass. I know. I was really mad when it got canceled.
Yeah, I mean, it's fucking Canadian sci-fi just is awesome.
Oh
man.
yeah,
I love it. Well, because they deal with non-capitalist tropes in a way that they're like doing post-socialist tropes.
Yeah,
that's like,
well, they deal with like corruption they'll address corruption that's happening on a scale that's so massive, that can only exist under a completely different economic hierarchy.
Yep.
And of course it's in space. The thing that I liked about that show is that it was like everything that Firefly wasn't.
I never watched Firefly.
And all the things that Firefly is, which is like a rogue group of crew on a ship that has to keep working so they can keep their ship running, and they're running into trouble with various forms of law enforcement. And in the case of Dark Matter, it's corporations and the Galactic Police, or whatever they're called. Whatever, but in Firefly, it's a little bit more tame. I think it was an FX.
Oh,
show.
That's right, because Dark Matter is like intergalactic corporations and shit. They're like federated, based on corporate
interests.
Yeah,
and Firefly is more of a republic versus the colonists. It's a Civil War story. Firefly is very much a Civil War story. Dark Matter is the Cold War in full effect.
Yeah, I guess I never thought of it like that, but because I think dark matter is interesting about presenting the paradigm of like how technological superiority can be the point of like breaking human uh human how do I say this? If there is a single human species, the idea of an emerging piece of technology giving one group power is like what often seems to be the
Fire,
splitting point. Yeah, it's like
electricity.
yeah, and it could be the uniting thing, but it ends up being the dividing thing.
The thing that I thought about you're talking about the blink drive.
Yeah.
The thing that I thought was so interesting about the blink drive as a it's almost the hand of God. It's almost the machine of God in its ability to redirect this story, but it's the machine of God in the hands of the human.
Right.
And so they get presented with these. They're aware that their actions will have considerable impact, like galaxy universe-wide impact if they do the wrong thing, and so they're trying to observe that, be observant of that, and careful about their actions. But at the end of the day, they still have to use it. And so it's this. I think they managed to craft this fantastic story universe where there's incredible potential for the imaginable, and then they throw all these wrenches in the gears.
Yeah.
And then they work it out, and they figure out a solution with creativity, and sometimes they resort to violence. But the thing that I found most interesting about that show is that violence was always like the last last resort. They're being attacked, or they have to go in and they have to shoot their way into someplace to get something else.
Yeah.
But really, it always seemed like they didn't want to damage the ship. They didn't want to get hurt. They didn't want any of the crew to get hurt.
I think I find that to be more common with Canadian sci-fi than not. Like, it seems like the violence is never the first. Like, they don't reach for their gun first. Yeah. It's always assessing the situation and then trying to react, and then ultimately the gun comes out and they have the action scene. But it's like in a different order.
Yeah, it's a different measured response.
Yeah.
It's more of a reaction than action, I feel like. And that's not to say that the Canadian sci-fi doesn't have a lot of action. Continuum was full of action. That was a really good time travel story. But there was a lot more working out complex moral dilemma or ethical quandary than there was let's blow shit up. And also, I think that Canadian sci-fi does a great job of envisioning a level of technology that's accessible. Like I can imagine using those devices because
that makes sense.
They're not so future forward that it's like, what?
Yeah, that's like one of the things that has been discussed about futurism is like there's a limitation on it because it's usually an abstraction of things that are in existence now.
Yeah.
So that's why inherently, like, our ability to see the future is always limited by our own time, and that's kind of like, I feel like the good sci-fi gets out of that and brings you something that is accessible, but is also inconceivable to somebody in this time period. Like,
I liked the fact that the blink drive was a credit card. And they inserted it like a floppy disk or into a card reader, and then that's all that was necessary to turn the engine into a time travel engine or a interdimensional engine. That was a cool variation of technology or vision of technology.
Yeah.
The thing that is lacking in a lot of American science fiction is that I watched that Ad Astra. It's a movie where Brad Pitt has to find a way to get to Neptune to convince his dad to turn a machine off because it's going to destroy everything. And it's all waiting, lots of waiting, lots of times where it seemed like where I felt like I was waiting for somebody to say something, but they forgot their line almost. And and I'm sure that that passes for acting because we've got a generation of people who grew up watching Twilight series, and that's all just pensive breathing and no dialogue. But it was like a bad attempt at making a big screen blockbuster, like a big space movie. A big space movie. We're past the point of 2001 where we can have long periods of silence.
Yeah.
That's if anyone does it again, they're just going to get compared to 2001. And so to tell a good sci-fi space story without having a bug hunt or without someone going crazy and then opening a portal to hell.
Yeah.
I mean, we're at this place where we want human stories. I like human stories. We want stories about things that happen, but I think you're right, is that we can't really envision a future that's too far into the future. We just can't. We end up with like Barbarella, where the computers don't make sense and they're just waving their hand in front of a screen and it talks back to them. I don't think that's a very good future.
Or like what you're talking about reminded me of Event Horizon, where it's like
portal to hell.
Yeah, all our technology can do is send us to hell. Like that's the pinnacle of our technology. And it's this weird.
Isn't that like technophobia?
It's not only technophobia. It's like a weird imposition of Christian fear tactics into science fiction, where it's like, oh, you might not want to build that because you never know if Satan's on the other side. Like,
dude, if Satan's on the other side of some machine that we can turn on, we want to know what he has to say.
Right? Yeah, that's kind
totally
of
want to know what he has to say.
That's where when I watched that film, I feel like I must have been a teenager.
Oh, it came out when we would have been in high school.
Yeah, so that's where for people to be scared of that shit, it was like a comedy to me.
Yeah.
Like I thought of Event Horizon more of as a comedy than a horror.
There were moments when the sound effects made me jump, but the gore wasn't that gory.
No.
The one terrifying, like, you're locked out of an airlock and you don't have a spacesuit, took so long that he would have died. That wasn't really. There was a thrilling aspect to it, but that wasn't horrifying.
No, I mean,
and then even then, like, they didn't get it right. They show him screaming in space. That movie took a lot of liberties with physics, and I think that's what happens when horror genres try to move too far into science fiction. Horror genres work out really well if they stick to the tried and true method of scaring teenagers. But once they try to make it too intelligent or have too much information behind it, too much tech background to try and entice like an adult viewer or an adult audience, it runs into too many. They're not even continuity issues. They're like issues of like, I can't even suspend my disbelief.
Right. Yeah, I think there's too much Protestant influence on plots that don't have anything to do with Christianity that force like the suspension of disbelief to be pulled back, and it like pulls me out of a lot of shit, and that's kind of where it's it's like I can't get scared from horror films because of the overtones, and so I don't even bother with them.
When I was a Boy Scout, we were camping out at Crane Naval Research Facility because we were building trails, and it was everyone was telling scary stories around the campfire, and it got to me, and I was like, so, you go to college, take out some loans, graduate, get that job, buy that house, and then the market crashes and you owe unimaginable amounts of debt, and then the next thing you know, you lose your house and your wife leaves you and can't afford car payments, so you lose your job, And so at one point, one of the scoutmasters like, Tian, that's not really a scary story. That's more of an allegory. Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Radio is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Castle in partnership with KLST 103.5, radiocalicity.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 1 and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thanks again for listening.